They weren't just animals. They were power, prestige, and madness on four legs. In the Middle Ages, a man without a horse was no one. Knights lived and died by them, kings waged wars for them, and entire empires rose because of their hooves. But behind every glorious charge and royal parade, there was a truth the history books rarely tell, one that smelled of blood, sweat, and fear. These beasts were worshipped, tortured, trained like soldiers, and treated better than most humans. A warhorse could be worth more than a village, more than a man's life, and losing one could mean death or disgrace. From the bloody tournaments to the secret breeding stables of kings, horses ruled the medieval world in ways more twisted than you'd ever imagine. Tonight we'll uncover the mad truth about these creatures, how they shaped war, religion, and power itself. Before we ride into the chaos like this video, subscribe and tell us in the comments from where in the world you're watching. Our medieval village keeps growing, one story at a time. Long before knights wore armor, before castles ruled the horizon, there was the sound of hooves. It echoed through fields and valleys, carrying men toward glory, fear, or death. To the medieval mind, the horse wasn't just an animal. It was destiny in motion. When a boy dreamed of becoming a knight, his first prayer wasn't for a sword, it was for a horse. Without one, there was no title, no war, no song to remember his name. The horse was his weapon, his companion, his soul, and in a world where divine will shaped every breath, people believed these creatures were chosen by God himself. Priests blessed them before battles, monks carved their images beside saints. Some knights even refused communion unless their horses were blessed too. A warhorse wasn't a pet, it was a holy relic wrapped in muscle and fury. The names they gave them said everything: thunder, grace, vengeance, holy fire. Each one carried the weight of pride and prophecy. And when they charged into battle, they didn't just carry a man, they carried an entire kingdom's hope. But divine power demanded sacrifice. Training a horse for war was brutal. It began when the animal was barely a year old, fed carefully, beaten into discipline, hardened by noise, armor, and fear. The ideal warhorse had to endure screams, blood, and death without flinching. To make it fearless, knights exposed it to fire, drums, and corpses. If it didn't break, it became legend. If it did, it became meat. Owning one of these beasts was a privilege beyond measure. Only nobles could afford the cost: feeding, grooming, armor, and endless training. For the poor, the idea of riding was almost myth. They walked, they pulled, they served, but they never rode. In the Middle Ages, the saddle was a throne, and the horse a crown. Even the church saw meaning in their steps. The white horse symbolized purity and divine justice. The black one, sin and apocalypse. And when Revelation spoke of the four horsemen, people didn't imagine metaphors. They imagined real riders galloping through smoke and fire, just like the knights they saw on earth. But beneath all this holiness and heroism, there was something darker, because every rider knew, no matter how loyal or noble the horse, it could turn wild in an instant. One slip, one spark of fear, and the beast could crush its master under its hooves. The same power that carried men to victory could destroy them without warning. That was the true nature of the medieval horse: beauty and brutality in the same heartbeat. A creature that represented everything the Middle Ages stood for: faith, violence, and the thin line between both. So when you imagine a knight charging into battle, don't see just the man. See the animal that made him possible, breathing, trembling, and burning with the same madness that built an empire. To build a perfect knight, you first had to build a perfect horse, and that was no small task. Not every breed could carry a man in full armor, his weapons and a shield heavy enough to break bones. Only a few rare bloodlines were strong and disciplined enough, horses bred for generations under royal orders, selected like warriors before birth. In France they called them destriers, the true warhorses of legend, massive, muscular, and terrifying to behold. In England, great horses carried crusaders across continents. And from the east came the Arabians, smaller but faster, graceful and tireless, the purest blood ever known. Kings fought not just over land but over stallions. A single breeding horse could be worth a fortune. Breeding became a science wrapped in superstition. Stable masters studied the stars to decide when to mate them. They prayed, whispered spells, and even sang to pregnant mares, believing the foal could hear and be born brave. It wasn't madness, it was faith in muscle. From birth, a chosen foal lived under constant discipline. It learned to obey without hesitation, to ignore pain, and to fear only one thing: its master's voice. They were fed better than most humans. Oats, barley, honey, even wine before battle to keep their blood hot. Every hair was brushed, every hoof polished like armor. But this care wasn't love, it was investment. The armor of a knight was nothing without the armor of his horse. Thick leather, iron plates and chainmail covered their heads and chests. Some wore crests and banners as symbols of the family they served. When they charged, they looked like living fortresses, half man, half monster, unstoppable in the chaos of war. But beneath the glory was agony, the heat, the weight, the sound of clashing metal. It broke them slowly. A warhorse could carry more than 150 kilos of man and gear, galloping into walls of spears. Each battle left scars, visible or not. Some came back limping, others never came back at all. And yet they were honored like heroes. Knights wept for their fallen horses. Some buried them with armor and carved their names on stone. To lose a warhorse wasn't just losing an animal, it was losing a part of one's soul. Even in tournaments where war became spectacle, the horse bore the danger. Crowds cheered as armored beasts collided, their riders pretending to fight for glory. But the horses didn't pretend. They bled, they fell, and they carried their masters until the last breath. They didn't understand the applause, only the pain and command. Every hoofbeat on the battlefield was a drum of power and suffering. Every victory depended on a creature that never chose to fight. And in that contradiction, loyalty without freedom, the medieval horse became something greater than myth. It was both machine and martyr, a symbol of how far humanity would go to control nature, and how much of itself it lost in the process. When the knights returned home covered in glory, they were celebrated as heroes. But the real hero was left behind, grazing quietly, wounded, its armor rusting in the stable, forgotten, but undefeated. In the Middle Ages, the difference between walking and riding could define your entire life. It wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of class, blood, and destiny. To ride a horse was to rise above the world, literally and symbolically. It meant freedom, control, and power. The poor walked, the merchants drove carts, but only the noble rode. And from that simple truth, an entire hierarchy was born. A man on horseback saw the world differently. From that height, he looked down on peasants who toiled in the mud, on servants who bowed at his passing, and on beggars who were never allowed to touch the reins. The saddle became a throne in motion, one that declared, "I rule and you serve." Even laws recognized this. In many kingdoms, only landowners or knights could own horses. To ride without permission could mean lashes, prison, or worse. Because riding wasn't just movement, it was status. A mounted man was a symbol of authority, almost divine in the eyes of the common folk. When a knight rode through a village, people stopped their work. Children stared, women whispered, and men lowered their heads. The horse's hooves weren't just sound, they were a reminder. That power had shape, weight, and rhythm. But that privilege came with a strange kind of blindness. The noble learned to see the world from above, and in doing so forgot what it felt like to walk. They lived high, spoke high, even built their castles high, always above someone else. And the horse became their bridge to that illusion of superiority. The church saw the same thing and tried to use it. Priests compared the horse to the soul, the rider to faith, and warned that if you didn't hold the reins firmly, sin would take control. It was both metaphor and message. Only those guided by God deserved to ride. For the poor horses were creatures of another world. Most had never touched one. They pulled plows, carried loads, and worked themselves to death beside oxen. To them, the knight and his horse were almost one being, shining, distant, unreachable. The sight of them inspired awe and resentment in equal measure. But sometimes, the lines blurred. A peasant could become a soldier could earn a horse, and with a horse came respect, the first step toward something more. In that sense, the animal wasn't just a symbol of power, it was a ladder, a dangerous one, but a ladder nonetheless. The irony was cruel. Those who could afford horses rarely needed them to survive. Those who needed them most could never own one. The horse carried both the nobleman and the weight of the system that crushed the poor beneath its hooves. Yet for all its injustice, the medieval world couldn't exist without that animal. The horse was movement, trade, war, and prestige. It was civilization itself in motion. Without it, the map of Europe would never have taken shape. The kingdoms would have remained isolated, and history would have crawled instead of galloped. So when you imagine a knight riding through the mist, remember this: he's not just going to battle, he's carrying the invisible burden of every class, every belief, every fear, on the back of a creature that never chose sides. Every glorious knight, every king in shining armor, every victorious charge began in silence, in the dark smell of hay, sweat, and iron. While nobles feasted and priests blessed their banners, others worked through the night. They were the ones who fed the horses, brushed their coats, cleaned their wounds, and prepared them for the chaos of war. They were the stable masters, the squires, and the nameless boys who learned to fear the sound of hooves more than the sound of battle. Without them, no army could move, no knight could fight, no legend could live. The stable was their world, a kingdom without sunlight. The air was heavy with steam, dung, and whispers. Every stall held a creature stronger than 10 men, and every mistake could cost a life. They spoke to the horses in low tones, not out of affection, but survival. One wrong move, one startled beast, and you could be crushed under the same hooves that carried kings. A stable master was both servant and scientist. He knew more about medicine than many monks. He mixed herbs for wounds, soothed colic with honey and ash, and understood the rhythm of breathing better than any physician. Some were said to heal horses with prayers, others with curses. Every kingdom had one man like this, invisible to history, but essential to its survival. Then there were the squires, the future knights. They were young, noble, and terrified. Before learning to wield a sword, they learned to shovel manure. Before lifting a lance, they lifted saddles heavier than their bodies. They brushed, fed, and trained the horses they hoped one day to ride. Only when they earned the animals' trust could they dream of earning a title. It was humility forged in sweat. But for the common stable hands, those born without names or titles, life was harder. They slept beside the horses to keep them calm in storms. They ate last, bathed rarely, and spoke only when spoken to. Yet many of them knew more about the beasts than the knights who claimed to own them. They could tell a horse's mood by the twitch of an ear, sense illness before it showed, and predict storms by the way the herd shifted at dusk. They saw what others never saw: the exhaustion, the fear, the eyes of the animal that had seen too many battles. To them, the horse wasn't divine or heroic. It was a prisoner, just like them, and maybe that's why they understood each other. Both served masters who spoke of honor, but rarely of mercy. Sometimes when no one watched, they whispered to the horses, stories, songs, or simple apologies, as if asking forgiveness for the world. And in those moments, the boundaries between man and beast disappeared. Both were bound by reins they hadn't chosen. No bard ever sang of these men. Their hands were too dirty, their faces too common. But without them, the knight's armor would rust, the banners would fall, and the warhorses would starve. They were the heartbeat behind the glory, the forgotten keepers of power. In the end, history remembers the riders. But the truth, the mad truth, is that the real strength of the Middle Ages was born not in the battlefield, but in the stables. Every empire falls, every legend fades, and even the creatures that carried the Middle Ages toward glory eventually met their end, not in battle, but in silence. It began with smoke, gunpowder. The first cannons roared across Europe, and the world of knights trembled. The horse, once unstoppable, now flinched before thunder it couldn't understand. Armor cracked under bullets, banners burned, and what once seemed divine suddenly felt fragile. The age of chivalry collapsed beneath the weight of progress. No longer did kings ride into battle surrounded by shining cavalry. Now they watched from distance, behind walls and gunfire. The warhorse, once a living weapon, became a liability. Too loud, too visible, too mortal. By the 15th century, the great horses of Europe began to disappear. Breeding lines broke. The destriers that once carried crusaders across continents vanished like ghosts. In their place came smaller, lighter breeds, for transport, for work, for show. The beasts of war were reborn as tools of peace, their bloodlines diluted, their glory forgotten. The knights didn't fare much better. Without horses to ride, their titles meant little. The new age demanded gunmen, not riders. Honor was replaced by strategy, courage by calculation, and the sound that once defined Europe, the gallop of hooves, was drowned beneath the echo of gunfire. Yet, even in defeat, the horse remained sacred in memory. Artists painted them as symbols of lost nobility. Poets compared their fall to humanity's own. And when the last tournaments ended, people still gathered to watch horses run, not for war, but for nostalgia. They didn't cheer for the riders anymore. They cheered for the ghosts. Still, in the countryside, far from the royal courts, A few of these creatures lived on. They pulled carts, ploughed fields, and carried travelers from one forgotten village to another. The same strength that once built kingdoms now sustained ordinary lives. The divine became domestic, the myth became mundane, but perhaps that's where the real beauty lies. The medieval horse didn't truly vanish, it simply changed roles, just as humanity did. The hooves that once thundered through battlefields still echo, faintly, in every story of endurance, loyalty, and freedom. Because in a way, the warhorse was never just an animal. It was a mirror, showing us what we could be at our best and what we destroy when we forget our limits. Centuries later, when engines replaced muscle and the world learned to fly, the bond between man and horse didn't disappear. It became memory. And in that memory, something eternal remained. So the next time you see a horse grazing quietly in a field, remember, you are looking at the last living remnant of the Middle Ages, an echo of power, pride, and madness that once ruled the world. Because the truth, the mad truth, is that no invention ever carried humanity with more strength, grace, or tragedy than the horse. The sound of hooves once ruled the world. It built empires, carried kings, and thundered through centuries of faith, fury, and dreams. But now it's only an echo, a fading rhythm buried beneath the noise of modern life. Still, that echo matters. Because the story of the horse is the story of us, of loyalty turned into power, of strength turned into pride, and of glory that always comes with a price. The Middle Ages may be gone, but the madness that drove them still rides within us. So when you see a horse today, calm, gentle, silent, remember what it once was. A god of war, a companion of kings, and the heartbeat of a world that refused to stand still. Thank you for watching Medieval Crazy History. If this journey through madness and muscle moved you, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Our medieval village grows with every soul who joins. And join us next time as we uncover another wild, forgotten truth from the dark heart of history.